Hi there everyone, it's Marc from Tranquil Garden Urban Homestead. Today I'm going to show you what I do to organize all of my garden supplies, both in my greenhouse and in my garden shed that's adjoined to the greenhouse. So organizing your garden tools and your garden supplies is really critical to save time and to avoid having to look for things that you're not sure where they are. It also helps when you're looking at seeing what tools you need to buy and what supplies that you might also need to restock before you run out of them. The other advantage of keeping things organized is that you avoid tripping over anything, which can lead to injuries and can lead you to damaging yourself and the tools or the supplies. So let's have a look first at the benches that I have in my greenhouse. And for the most part I try to keep them free so that I can actually put plants on it. So I don't really store them too much on here other than having a few things that I use all the time. One of them being pruners, some chopsticks, my garden plan, a list of to-dos with a pencil, and then right now I just have some seeds that I'm saving that are kind of in the middle of drying out. But you can also see that I've got a big green tray here that's going to be for my fall seeding to raise my fall plants as seedlings. But underneath the bench there's tons of room, and so what I have here is I have some wood shavings that I use for my strawberries, and I have some core that's been actually packed in a plastic bag to keep it dry, and some vermiculite that I use to make my soilless mix. And then speaking of that, I have a bucket that has actually the soilless mix inside, along with some sieves and things like that on top, in case I need to sieve out some rocks or something else, and some compost that I'm using for other things. And then as we progress along, you can see I'm using lots of buckets, which I got more or less for free. I've got some rock dust, I've got some granular organic fertilizer, and I've got some lime, and I believe there's some sand in that red bucket. And then I've got some bags that various stuff came in that I'm storing so that I can maybe store things like finished compost in there for other purposes. And then I've got a big tray that I actually use for potting things up, as well as a dome for one of my trays so that I can keep things humid and warmer in especially springtime when I plant my seeds. And then I've got some additional soil and composted mushroom manure, and some other compost in bags that I just threw in the corner here because it was a convenient place. And then on my water barrel, my daughter taped up her garden plan, so she's got that handy. But then on top of the water barrel there's a nice surface that has some fertilizer on it, some liquid seaweed and fish fertilizer, a spray bottle for spraying water on seedlings, and I've got some plant tags and another chopstick and a pen that I can write on the plant tags. I've got a smaller bucket of the organic granular fertilizer, and then I've got a few smaller watering cans that I use when I'm collecting water from my rain barrel to water my seedlings. And below the water barrel there are a couple of larger watering cans. And then in my sink area I've got a step stool that I sometimes use to reach other parts of the greenhouse, and underneath in the little cubby here I've got a bucket that I sometimes use for washing stuff with, and then I've repurposed an old shower caddy, and I've got some oxygenated bleach which I use for cleaning wood outside, and I've got sponges, and I've got sanding sponges that I use for cleaning my tools, the metal tools, cloth, and I've got some brushes for cleaning tools. I've got my muck gloves or mud gloves up there for when I'm working in my pond or in wintertime when everything is so wet. And then I've got, of course, some towels to dry hands with. And in this corner I am storing my weed torch that I use for torching weeds and cracks and crevices in concrete. And I've got a review on my blog on this torch and how to use it. And then in this little corner of the greenhouse I've got a cabinet, and I'll show you in a sec what's actually inside of it. But I also have a place for a broom that I use for keeping the greenhouse clean. I've got right now my apple and fruit picker, because right now we're harvesting fruit from our trees. And I've got a little caddy, again from old shower caddy, that I'm using to store gloves. And I've got a couple of tools there hanging there. And I've also got my seating square. And then my daughter's corner, she's got her tools and her kneeing mat, and then I've got some kneeing mats for the adults, for my wife and I. So in this caddy, I've got some electrical things, which are my car heater that I sometimes use in the greenhouse if it gets really cold, to kind of keep the temperature up, especially at nighttime. And I've got some bags, and I've got some onion sacks that I use for making compost tea. I've got more fertilizers. I buy the big gallon jugs or so of fish fertilizer, seaweed fertilizer, some rhododendron fertilizer, and I've got some ammonia for trying to keep the raccoons away from my plums, which doesn't really work. And then I've got my propane bottles for the torch to keep them cool in the cabinet. And I've got a kettle for boiling water to kill weeds, and those types of things for organically keeping pests and weeds away. Okay, so now we'll head into the shed, which is kind of attached to the greenhouse. It used to be much bigger, but we've made it smaller now because we don't need as much space. So it's a little bit confined interior, so I'm going to have to see how best I can show you everything. So starting here, I've got some leftover mortar and some acrylic mortar. What is it called? It is called Admix. So for fixing stuff outside in the concrete and such. I've got all my hand tools basically, and long handle tools hanging from a pegboard. And pegboard is the greatest invention to be able to organize your tools and have them ready at hand without having to look for them. I've got my wood chipper and shredder here, my pressure washer, and then I've got a shelf here. Let me see if I can show you what's on it. So on this shelf we have lots of pots, hanging baskets. I've got all, on the left there, I've got all of my pots that I use for seeding, and below that I have various different trays and trays for putting under pots to keep from making too much of a mess when the water runs through the pot. And I've got a mishmash of stuff here, an old mallet that I use for pounding in steaks. I've got a soil test kit. I've got lots more chopsticks, and I've got things like ties for tying up plants, and I've got clothespins that I use for securing my row covers, and I've got some plant tags, so lots of different stuff, a ball of rubber bands which sometimes comes in handy, and I've even got a spare fan for my ventilation system in the greenhouse in case I want to add more ventilation at some point in the future. And then below that I've got a whole mess of different kinds of clear containers. A lot of them are just from cakes or from containers of greens that I bought at the grocery store. And then I also have these plastic cloches, which are great for keeping plants protected in the early spring or into the fall. And I've also got some greenhouse plastic and some other floss of various type, and above it in the plastic bag are all my row covers, floating row covers. Below that I've got some extra hoses, and I've got some sprinkler parts and parts for my water pump for the ponds, and I've also got some extra pond liner for the ponds in case I need to fix a tear or something like that. And then in the depths of the garden shed, we've got our lawnmower, we've got more tools hanging here, lots of smaller tools. And in the corner we've got my old grow light and an old chain that I can use for chaining something up so someone doesn't steal it when I store something outside. I've got a walk maker mold for making concrete walks. Lots of buckets again. Buckets are really handy, and they come in handy for lots of different purposes. I've got a hand truck for moving heavy stuff, because you gotta be careful. And then I've also got axes and chisels and stuff for working again with concrete or hard surface stuff. And then I've got all of my cutting tools, so things like loppers, saws, head shears, and regular garden shears for cutting the edges of grass and lawns. And above that I've got actually a chainsaw and a hedge trimmer, both electric operated, which I sometimes use. And really above our head here, if we move all the way up, I've used the space above to keep things like stakes that I use for staking up plants. Hopefully you can see those. And I tend to keep whatever I can that's long, because you never know when you need more stakes to stake up a tomato plant that's overloaded with fruit. And then I have what every farmer needs, and that's lots of baling wire, because you never know when you need some baling wire to tie something together or to support some plants or something like that. So that's how I actually organize my supplies and my tools. There are of course other ways to do it, and it really depends on what space you have. Some people store their stuff in a garage, or you might store it in a separate shed that's separate from the house, just in the middle of your yard. You might just have some place in your basement where you can store stuff. So the important thing is keeping stuff dry, keeping stuff away from things like rats and mice, which I've had a little bit of problems with in my shed, so there's a few holes I need to close up. But otherwise, you just make do with whatever space you have. Try not to accumulate too much stuff that you don't actually ever use. I ended up actually, when I reorganized, to actually cull through and get rid of a lot of stuff that I've never used and probably never ever will use. So there was some stuff I threw out, some stuff that I just recycled. And so when you're organizing, that's actually a good idea, is to try to go through and get rid of stuff that you know you'll never use. And make sure you dispose of stuff properly. Like if you're in the process of moving to more organic gardening, then you'll want to make sure that you dispose of things like pesticides and herbicides properly. Check with your local municipality or your state or province to make sure that you're disposing of it properly. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I organize things, and if that will inspire you to organize your tools and supplies, then I think this video has been worth watching. So if you like these videos and would like to see more of them, please be sure to subscribe. Feel free to comment or ask questions about how I organize things below, and also make sure to hit the like button, the thumb, to like the video if this video has been useful for you. So hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.